Bulletstorm is an over-the-top first-person shooter developed by the studio known as People Can Fly. It's kind of like the Burnout of shooters with a little bit of Duke Nukem and a little bit of Firefly/Serenity thrown in the mix. So Epic and People Can Fly have a very great collaborative relationship. People Can Fly are the primary developers of the game, but I'm playing the game 3 to 4 times a week. Tanya Jessen is our producer who works with them quite a bit. She's over in Warsaw on a regular basis, as well as our art director Chris Perna, who helps assist with the look and feel of the game, and our artists all pitch in to make sure that PCF knows how to use the tools and do an outstanding job. So the environment that the player is in Bulletstorm is a planet that's very, very hazardous. It's a planet that's been affected by a calamity, and what's happened is anybody who's left on the planet has either gone feral or has turned into a mutant, as well as the plant life around the planet. So the environments around you have giant cacti, they have bent out rebar, sharp pieces of metal that you can kick your enemies into. On top of that, there are creatures that are mutated plant life that will eat the enemies or potentially try to eat you. So when you add in roving bands of flesh-eating gangs with jagged environments and crazy plants that want to eat you, have kind of an insane mix. So the story is being penned by a man known as Rick Remender, and he's a very, very successful Marvel comic. And he has a great writing style, whereas he does this kind of pulpy, over-the-top, tongue-in-cheek style of narrative. The game features 2 main protagonists, a guy named Grayson Hunt and his sidekick named Ishii, and you start the game at the very beginning as kind of these badass members of a kind of assassin squad, and you make a wrong decision at the end of that mission, which is of course all playable. You ultimately wind up drunken space pirates years later, just being debaucherous on the edge of space. One day you run into your former commander with his very, very badass battleship, and you, in a drunken rage, decide to try and ram him, and then the 2 ships tumble towards the very dangerous planet below like lovers in the night, and then it's your goal to get off that planet potentially alive. So what Bulletstorm does is it brings a new verbiage to the first-person shooter genre. You have the ability to do these body moves, such as a kick that sends your enemies flying up in the air, or a slide, kind of like Mega Man, to slide into them and send them flying. You can also use your energy leash to grab your enemies and pull them towards you, and start combining these together with some crazy over-the-top weapons like the flail gun, which is essentially 2 grenades attached with a chain in the middle. So wrap up your enemy around the legs, kick him into the other enemies, leash him over, and then explode him and get these great points. When you put the credits in world and you allow the player to get points with that, suddenly things get a lot more interesting, whereas you see an enemy and you don't want to kill him as quickly as possible, you want to kill him as stylistically and as cool as you can. So when you have that kind of motivation to get upgrades, you can get an upgrade for your light default assault rifle that allows you to essentially shoot 100 bullets at one time, melting the flesh off of your enemy and leaving a very hot skeleton to fall away. You can do all sorts of things to kind of allow yourself to slide further and increase your body moves and purchase different upgrades to encourage the player to kill with skill. So when the guys at People Can Fly decide they want to do a weapon, they kind of put their heads together and say, like, what kind of craziness can we do here? And we're in the back going, yes, go crazy, do crazy things. You start off with your Peacemaker carbine, which is a base kind of AK-47 of the future, and then you get the flail gun that allows you to wrap people up and blow them up. And then from there on out, there's a lot of very, very great twists on what are traditionally seen as regular first-person shooter weapons that will allow Bulletstorm to own them in its own space, as well as leverage the skill shot system in a creative manner. One of the great moves that you can use to upgrade your leash, which is your kind of energy whip, is this thing called the Thumper, which allows you to whip it on the ground and send your enemies flying up in the air, as well as the explosive trash can barrels that are throughout the game. When you combine that with, for instance, a helicopter, and you come upon a gang members who are hanging out waiting to leave in the helicopter, they ultimately wind up going into the blaze, and you have what is a horrible, gory mess. One thing that we are doing to encourage the player to try different weapons and different techniques is not only having cannon fodder enemies, but also having enemies that counter against some of your moves. For instance, there's a character that comes out in heavy armor that you just can't kick or slide into. You have to systematically pull off pieces of his armor with your energy leash, right? And these are the kinds of things that we as game designers do to keep the game tricky and kind of switch it up. We at Epic are big fans of boss fights, but the guys at PCF have really done some crazy, insane stuff in the past in Painkiller, and you're going to see that tradition continuing in Bulletstorm. The demonstration that we showed today featured this really crazy, overgrown plant life that at the beginning of the demo consumes your squad mate and then takes him off a few hundred yards away. You fight to him and ultimately find out that this was just one tentacle for this giant creature, and the battle rages on for a fair amount of time, and by the end of it, you'll be very, very exhausted. Throughout the game, the player has different motivations to kind of get to the next area and to kind of like solve what's going on. In the section that we demoed today, the player's friend Ishi is consumed by the plant and then has a radar to kind of lead him to where he's going. We have all sorts of other tricks and things to motivate the player. There's sections of the game where you're being chased by something and you have to get away from it as quickly as possible. And then there's parts where you just have to explore and find the best way through. Creatively, you need to kind of have different objectives and different driving forces for the player to get to the next area, otherwise the game becomes stale. So I'm really, really thrilled to be unveiling Bulletstorm to the public and to have the first footage coming out. I don't believe that anybody can truly get this game until they see it in person. It's a game that kind of puts the fun back in a first-person shooter by not necessarily taking itself too seriously. That's not to say other shooters aren't fun, but Bulletstorm does it with a nod, a wink, and a smile. It's coming out on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC sometime in 2011, and we really hope gamers dig it.